you very much. I'm very, very happy to be here because I find the meetings where you're a bit outside your normal bubble always the most exciting ones. And I do feel that what we're trying to do here and in other spaces is more than overdue, which is connecting the people that have for a long time said what has to change, where of course the Club of Rome has had its origin, saying actually we don't have all these unlimited resources that we think we can use to produce prosperity for the people of this world, with how can we make the changes happen that we do foresee to be necessary. And I do feel on the science side this is happening slowly. One can wonder how slowly, by more and more meetings between the natural scientists and the social scientists. And I do think under the tag you already used at Hanno, systems, we do manage to bring that together in the practitioner sphere as well. And this is why I'm very happy that you came in with systems and big picture, because I think this is what I'll bring here today. And I got asked by Hanno to do a bit of emphasis on the planet, because the planet tends to be this third dimension that makes it a bit more tricky out of our liberal idea of progress and liberation and endless fruition and growth and possibly also material consumption. So this is what I'll start with today, and I thought I'll kick it off with this era that we have been in for the last 10,000 years, which is called the Holocene. And as you can see here, it's only been a very small and short episode of the longer span of history. And as you can see here, when you talk with climate change people, they will say, oh yeah, climatic change has been normal throughout history as well. But you can tell them that the last 10,000 years, it has fortunately not been so erratic anymore, because otherwise we wouldn't have had the chance to develop as we have. So all the great European civilizations, Greek, Roman, all of that is 10,000 years because we were so lucky that this very highly fluctuating, crazy climatic change was stabilized. And this was the Holocene. That was a good space to be in. It allowed for all the progress that we had. And then what happened is we were really, really successful in harvesting this, which is great for our species. It meant great survival, great flourishing. We stayed longer. Life expectancy grew. Less people dying, especially young children. We managed to eradicate a lot of poverty, so people just could stay on longer. And that meant that around 1950, as you can see here, something kicked off. And that is called now basically the entrance into the Anthropocene. Because not only multiplied people tremendously, when you think of it, 4 billion or 7 billion within 1 century is a huge gap, or a huge jump, but also did we have a per capita consumption that went up rapidly. And that all meant that the basic pattern of the second half of the 21st or 20th century was this hockey stick curve that many probably know from climate change, but it does come in when you look at all the different socio-economic trends, like real GDP, but foreign direct investment, etc. as well, but also, of course, in how much we use up from our planet or from our sphere. And this is why the term Anthropocene now means that humans are part of shaping what is going to be our climatic and biological future. Our impact on the Earth systems is so big that we are co-creating with the natural systems what is going to be next. And there, of course, it'd be great to understand what should be next. And I wonder if anyone in this room has woken up this morning to say, I don't want children to be out of poverty. I don't want my kids to be able to run around outside without being polluted. I don't like the absence of wars tremendously in my country. And yet, collectively, we don't seem to manage to bring out those wishes that we individually seem to share. And this is the quiz, or the puzzle, that I think we're all often trying to solve. And this has been, in terms of connecting the social and the ecological agenda in the sustainability frame, a very, very important icon. It's called the donut. Donut economics is Kate Raworth's blog now. She invented the whole scheme, and it came from the notion of planetary boundaries, these ecological ceilings that have been developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center under Johan Rockström again, to specify a bit more, similar to originally it was the Club of Rome's expectations of certain limits to be hit, but then they specified it a bit more and identified 9 dimensions where we really are intervening so massively with the reproductive systems of our Earth that we risk to tip it out of the Holocene stability that we have witnessed in the last 10,000 years. So you do see climate change, which gets the most attention, even though not all politicians seem to think that it is an urgent agenda. Then we've got the ozone layer depletion, where we did reverse the trends: air pollution, biodiversity loss, land conversion, fresh water withdrawals, nitrogens, phosphorus, chemical pollution, ocean acidification. So you can see in different areas, it's not just climate change, we're overusing what the Earth can reproduce. So this is why the idea is to let's stay within those ecological limits. Let's try to understand them and use them as boundaries, because that Holocene was really a good place to be in. Let's not risk going back into the erratic space. And then, of course, there's the social idea of the social foundation, to say that's all nice, but we do have a minimum that everyone should be entitled for or to in order to be living in dignity on this planet. So we do have to eat into our planet, or we have to use a certain amount of what it provides for us in order to be catering for everyone. And that's how Kate Raworth then said, wonderful, we've got a donut space, which is a corridor for development. And within that corridor, we can find multiple solutions of trying to not fall underneath the social threshold and not go above the ecological threshold. So this is basically the long-term space where we can anticipate to have the lives that we individually are wishing for. The challenge is that we are currently not meeting that. You saw that in the red triangles going out to left and right. But the challenge is also that we're going to be yet more people, up to 10 billion in the next 30, 40 years. And that means that this is a nexus which is really focusing on the basics that everyone needs in order to survive: water, food, and energy. And how can we make sure that we have enough of that to make it go around for people, but also ensure that those ecosystems that are providing for fresh water, for food, and for energy are not overused so that it collapses in the midterm in the future. And there you can see that there's quite a pressure. So the whole idea in the ecological sphere is we really have to act fast. And that is one of the questions that I think is really worth exploring, because it's often held against democracy. I quite often get asked now, so what are you promoting then, an eco-dictatorship? I think we can do better. I think with people that understand what is the predicament of our time, we can move in a democratic way to change the systems. We don't need dictatorship. But it's, of course, an easy, bam, labeling and you're out of the conversation. Another one is, oh, we don't have time. Let's not have too much participation. So those go the two different kind of Totschlagargumente is a German term that's really nice, when you're kind of whacked over the head by an argument and feel like, oh, I can't move anymore. But those are the ones I think we need to grapple head on in order to be moving forward. Because this is the predicament that I don't think is the one we would want to share. So let's do it differently. Who has thought about differently? Of course, it's not so new as an idea. 1987, let's do sustainable development then. That's great. Let's make sure that not only the economics, but the environmental and the social pillar are thriving as well. What's the problem? We haven't really gotten there. We tried to do sustainability. We labeled a lot of things sustainability, but we haven't really bent the trends. And I want to go a little bit into why I think that happened before concluding, and why I think now is the time that we can make it happen. And why I think it is now sticks in this word, transform. This is 2015. You can say, oh, how sad. They had to kind of make another declaration about now let's do sustainability. We haven't really managed before, but now let's do it. But no, it's the great idea behind the Sustainable Development Goals, them being 17, is that it really started to merge the social agenda, which you see here. They were the Millennium Development Goals. They came out of the development organizations, the social pillar looking at, the economic pillar looking at. And then you've got the ones that are really looking at climate change, oceans and other water and life on land, but also you have a bit of a qualifier in sustainable cities, for example, or affordable and clean energy. Clean energy is always the sneaky one trying to get nuclear power in, so you want to be aware of the different labels that are floating around. But at least there's been a battle about how we get water provision sustainable. And so it is a proper integration for the first time of the two agendas, and it does reflect in personnel decisions, as Achim Steiner, formerly UNEP, the Environment Programme of the UN, has now just become the head of NDP, which is the development programme. So the SDGs do manage for the first time to try to integrate those two agendas. Let's get out of the pillars. And let's transform. The understanding is we can't get there with a little bit of tweaking here and there, with a little bit of doing it more efficient, with a little bit of spreading technologies more quickly and more widely. There is something more that needs to happen. And this is what I want to focus on. And that's my preferred quote of what is transformability. And I do consciously choose transformability instead of transformation because I think this is the empowering element. This is where we come in. It's an agency-based way of trying to understand how that change can come around. It's not just describing how infrastructures are going to shift and the political frameworks are going to shift with it, and then culture is somehow going to change and innovations are going to cascade down. There's all these great descriptions about structural shifting going on. And I always think, but who's the actor? Where's the verb? Who is shifting? Who is rethinking? Who is redoing? Who is reorganizing? And that's us. And this is what we should claim. And this is where you are much better than we are in the environmental space. So the capacity to create untried beginnings from which to evolve a fundamentally new way of living when existing ecological, economic, and social conditions make the current system untenable. Yes, resilience being an element of systems as a quality to say they can bounce back when there's a shock. So you do have the social conditions or economic or ecological untenable. That means we've got a huge crisis. That means we have to do things differently, and the better we are prepared, the more quickly we will bounce back. That's very reactive, and I think we've seen a lot of that in politics in the last years, that it always needs for a crisis before things can happen. But our ambition should be into the ability to get into untried beginnings before the system becomes untenable. And that has been the sixth scenario of the Club of Rome report in 1972. And especially Donald Meadows was always about this, to say, we're not predicting doom and gloom. What we're saying is we now got the capacity out of science, out of foresight, out of extrapolation of trends, to see that it will become untenable, so let's change now and avoid that. So that has been a precautionary approach. It has been something that you might think our species as the enlightened one, the one that can think logically, can anticipate, can extrapolate, and can reflect about what we're doing and why, would say, great, let's do that. Hasn't happened. So we're a bit in a squeeze now that everything happens at the same time. We already see the crises happening, but we also have gathered a lot of knowledge. So let's get it going and put it into action. And this is how transformation studies, from an agency point of view, look at this action and how small change can bring the big change. So our incremental or radical incremental, radical in the intent of where we want to go, but then small little steps that we constantly need at all different elements and areas can lead to the big change that we're after. It is the sense-making actors with their values, beliefs, knowledge, and worldviews that do co-create the productive processes that we have today. They haven't always been that way. They haven't fallen from the sky. Nor are markets just there because they're there. They've been shaped, they've been designed. So it's human nature, human technology, human infrastructure, relationships. And we can understand those, and we can see how they shape into systems. Socio-ecological technical systems, meaning we've got social components, technological and ecological ones, and they're often driven by a certain way of thinking economically by the actors involved. And those create path dependencies. So we can't just say, oh, we're going to do everything different tomorrow, obviously, because there's infrastructures, technologies in place, political institutions, the natural resources are in a state that they're in right now, loads of them needing to be regenerated. Economic institutions, the way they are, social cultural norms. So all of those are there, and they heavily impact on that Earth system. And this Earth system is feeding both the actors, but also are being part of those relationships or processes in order for them to function. So the more crisis we have here and here, the more potential we have to reflect upon whether what we've set up is actually good, or whether we'd like to change it. And yet, at the same time, of course, we do see here that these systems are our reality. They shape how we think the world is. How we describe today, how we perceive today, does have a strong impact of what we think is possible in the future. It creates a lot, or it requires a lot of imagination, a lot of letting go, a lot of clarity and guts and courage to say, no, we can do this fundamentally different. That's where the radical element comes in. It doesn't say we can do it tomorrow. It doesn't say it's going to be easy, but it says we can imagine something very different that would avoid to make the system untenable. And then we look at where do we go for the different interventions. It does require the challenging, and it does require the reflection about the purpose. Purpose for which we have set up those institutions. And if the purpose of a lot of economic growth for everyone was really good when there was 1 billion people, and seemingly endless nature, like it was in the 18th and 19th century still, fantastic. We didn't have a problem. We only had that when we multiplied so much and when the consumption level went up so much. So an old proper solution all of a sudden becomes a problem. But that's an integral element of systems when you look at them from a complex systems point of view and an evolving point of view. So yes, let's make the old solutions that have now become problems into new solutions by repurposing the systems and really say what it is that they should deliver. And I just want to go into identifying some of the elements where I feel we're caught hostage by the old narrative and the old idea about the purpose. And it's so there in our discourse, in some spaces more than in others, but certainly in the political sphere. And also when you talk with economists, of course, you're on really thin ice with some of the things that I'm saying. But the purpose of business and finance today, and to some degree of our own idea of successful lives, is really, in its image, quite similar to the great acceleration image that we've had. This is Google search. I just went for Google image search. And it was always, I swear, among the first 3 images that this came up for any one of those words. We don't have a different caption of what it could be to be economically successful when it's not supposed to be ever more money. Return on investments can't be flat, can't be stable, can't be steady, even if the population is not growing anymore. Quarterly reporting. We can't really do long-term investments because it would mean that for now, the short term, we would go probably down with our reporting. It would in the midterm pick up again, but then we're already punished by the stock markets or our investors. So we've given ourselves quite a straitjacket. And we've given us a possibility to dig into those terms and reclaim them, to open them up. Where is wealth? We still say we are growing economies. The world governments own this much. This is trillion US dollar, by the way, in 2017. So they have about this much. World GDP around 72, 73 trillion now. World stocks, they're on par. It's the first time that the stock market value is the same as world GDP. And then what's this thing? Derivatives, the financial markets. Financial sector building loads and loads of bets and options and ideas and puts and whatever they're called that have not so much to do with our real economy anymore. But when you look at the players in that field and what they're threatening to do or not to do, unless we're aligning our policies and our ideas and our production processes with their return on investment ideas, there's a lot of power in here. So how do we define wealth in order to be able to argue for different ways of policies and design? What are productivity gains? Right now, we have to make Europe much more productive and we have to get IT rolling out because otherwise everyone else is going to be much more productive than us. We're going to fall behind. Yes, but productivity goals, if they're only defined by reducing the costs of the input factors for production, means, humans are just becoming a bit more too expensive. Let's put them out. And as soon as Silicon Valley firms, the huge big 5, are promoting a basic income, you understand that they understand what's happening. And they want to, once again, put the costs for that change on the social area and claim all the profits on the private area. So they're doing good, they're disrupting, they're fantastic and bringing about new stuff, but unfortunately it has a big cost on society, but that will be putting to someone else. We have to talk about what happens here and who gets compensated for that. The next one would be, what do we sacrifice for that growth? I think we've had a chance in Germany at least to have an inquiry commission about what is growth, what is quality of life, and what is welfare. They're not the same. And we know already that we're measuring a lot of stuff under the GDP that is not really helping our societies to become more happy, to create better living conditions, the environment, health, etc. going down, people stressed out. We're saying we have to abolish environmental regulations so that growth can spur again. But growth really only measures the GDP, the market price of the things that have been exchanged for money. And then there's this thing called depreciation and regrettables. Regrettables is like, too bad that happened. It still created a lot of money. After every hurricane, GDP will boost in that area because people have to spend money on restoring what has been broken. So market prices for what's being exchanged are positive, but is that really a sign of progress? So we have to look at what we're doing there. When we say we have to go for growth, we can't have environmental social regulations because it's going to hamper growth. What kind of growth? For who? Where? And lastly, what does competitiveness do? We always have to be competitive, competitive. Yes, it made a lot of sense between people or between firms to say a market, competitors will drive prices down, innovation, etc. But what we've done is to scale it up to the nations. We have to be competitive with China, with US, and blah, blah. Who said that nations have to compete? They're not a market system. Who's benefiting from that discourse? And then competitive on the individual level. Are you ready? Have you prepared yourself? Are you self-augmenting yourself to be ready to perform in that digital age? We're all competitors now too. Who said that that is a requirement for a thriving society? So let's put terms back to where they're helpful, and let's get them out of discourses where they're obfuscating. And this is why I think it's really time to rethink sustainable development and to make means means and declare ends to be ends. And this is why the 3 pillars are done and over with. What we're talking about is the environment, which is what we've inherited to live in. This has been the Holocene that we've been given to thrive in. We've created societies within those, and those have very, very different ways of organizing themselves. All the processes that we create can look very different. The economy should be a servant. That's the thing that we've created. That's the thing that we can most quickly change. And when you think of it, this can collapse. Yes, it will have very, very damaging effects on this, but it won't take it down. We can rebuild the economy. If this collapses, it'll take the economy right with it. Environment can still stay. If this collapses, but we're focusing here. So let's try to understand what it is that we want to come around and what we want to create in the future, and what are then the institutions that can help us bring that about. And this is why I think transformation as a repurposing of systems is something that really can bridge our 2 communities. We would do a lot here. We listen to a system saying, oh, we have a bit too much consumption here and there, so let's up the tax slightly or put in a different efficiency standard, and then we think it's going to save the planet. Not quite. Then when we see it doesn't really work, we change a bit the rules and incentives. Maybe we have to lower compensation for firms that really are going down a very destructive road. But we hardly ever go at this fundamental deep layer of purpose. And that's a graph basically coming from Donella Meadows' article that I really recommend for everyone to read. It's very nicely written. She's a fantastic writer. It's called Leverage Points. And she looks at how can we affect change in systems. And usually this will be easier to get through, but the leverage or the general impact on how a system will develop in the future is much lower than when we change its general purpose. Change the idea of the shared mindsets that translate then into the vision, the goals, and the ideas about how we want to shape this and this in order to get us where we all aspire to go together. And this is therefore why I think this is something, it looks a bit still too scientific. You have to do that when you want to publish with Springer and want to kind of get your credits in the scientific space. But I do think it is something that I would love to engage with you about and see where you feel you've been working on this, because it is a hacking of a system. This is what I feel can be done when we're looking at solutions, when we're looking at solving a problem. We can start to identify the system that's around it and to start understanding why the problem persists. And once you go into the whys and try to do that holistically, you will understand that there are quite a few P's at work. And you can also understand that 2 of the P's are really important when we say we want to have long-term sustainable solutions. There's the planet, and there are people. Good ingredients for a future on this planet. And then they've created the processes that have economic, cultural, political, and technological elements to them. And some of those can drive in a particular direction, some of those can hamper going another direction, but all of them will be maintained, shaped, changed by the people that are informed by the paradigms they're sharing and thus building that purpose into the processes. So when we start engaging here, we can hack what is going on here, and we can help change this so that it aligns those 2. We see that needs a lot of different skills. And this is why I think the whole notion of saying we need to work together across teams, across silos, really rethink what we're meaning, really find the language that can express what we want to do, does require the new process that you're all after. And I really look forward to hearing more what you're doing here and to bring that back to my scientific community. Maybe redraw that with you, and then we can go out with it. Thank you very much.